Which issue and very much in a month we had some
We've got the 3 cameras, and what will happen is as you raise your cards for questions, I'm going to be pinging back and forth, and I'll say, like, Yasmin, let's go to you, and then I'll say, all right, Sean, you're next. So our camera operators will know, okay, that's who I have to go and focus on. So stage right, Maureen is your camera person. Stage left, it's not Melissa? Okay. Kara, we'll do it.
Melissa's pressing the buttons and...
Okay, so Melissa's our director tonight.
Do we get to move in case the other side's our better side?
If you want to sit next to Christy, who is in near Siberia because she has a cold, feel free. Yeah, so we might move Matt down there now too. So the thing is, we really need to be mindful of having the microphone right in your face because we need to be sure that our voices are being picked up, and it may seem loud to us, but it's probably going to be people yelling at their screen saying "speak up" kind of thing. We'll get through this as best we can, and I appreciate everybody's patience and flexibility with this. So we don't have Ritika, Monica, or John, and I know Abdul is going to be watching this live stream here. So we'll get going here probably when our director says she's ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
You've been recording this whole time.
Oh, great. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 10th meeting of the Middle School Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee. And yes, this is a unique situation where we're conducting our meeting, but we do not have the public in attendance. So we're taking this step because of the district's limitation on large group gatherings due to the COVID-19 concerns. We're live streaming this meeting, so please, it's going to be critical that we all lean into our microphones, speak slowly, clearly, and directly so our audience is able to hear what's being said. And for those folks who are watching right now, please bear with us. This is new to us, and so we're going to do the best that we can. Although the public is not in attendance, this meeting is a public meeting of the Boundary Committee because the meeting is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. All the meeting materials are available to the public through the posting of the materials on the district's webpage, including materials that have been distributed to the committee today, and I'll list those in just a moment. And for those of you who are watching and may not know, my name is Stephen Sparks. I'm the Executive Administrator for Long Range Planning, and I'll be facilitating these meetings. And as we do before every meeting, and for consistency's sake, we're going to review the meeting expectations for this project. And those expectations are, we assume the best intentions. We all want the best for all of our students. We listen intently to understand better. We are open to considering new ideas. We remain open to influence and are not judgmental. We will consider all options. There are no bad questions. Our interactions will be done with respect, and we will respect opposing viewpoints. Our district committee, or our committee members, represent communities and viewpoints from across the district, and they're not here solely to represent a school or their own interests. The committee's questions, comments, suggestions, and ultimately their recommendation will be for the benefit of all students in the district. And I remind everyone that the committee's eventual action will be a recommendation to Superintendent Grotting. The superintendent with the board will be making the ultimate decision. The notice about our closing this meeting was done last night, pretty late, and so the public has not had an opportunity to really react to this news. And we did post another notice this morning talking about how we are going to be doing this on live streaming and not taking public testimony. However, we have published all public testimony that has been submitted through the comment page on our webpage up to 11:59 p.m. yesterday evening, and all of those comments have been distributed to the committee. So, as we always do, I want to remind everyone about the board's objectives for this project. One, we're establishing a new boundary for the Timberland area school. We're going to reduce the number of students at Stoller to approximately 90% of the permanent capacity. I want to note that this, as we have talked about before, this objective is for school year 2021. We want to balance the enrollments at the other middle schools, and minor adjustments to other attendance boundaries, elementary and high school boundaries, are possible. Also, I want to review the policy JC factors, and these factors are student body composition, current and future availability of space at a school, feeder patterns from elementary, middle to high school, and neighborhood proximity and accessibility. These factors have equal standing and are not ranked by priority. So, as we are moving forward here, after the meeting on February 25th, where we reviewed one map, we did not come to a preliminary agreement at that meeting, but one item was agreed upon, and that was moving Oak Hills east. So the area of Oak Hill east of Bethany Boulevard would be moved to feed the Timberland area middle school. The map that's been published for this evening shows that change. Otherwise, the map that you're looking at tonight is no different from the February 25th meeting. The committee did request a number of potential changes to the map, which are described in the memorandum for this meeting. So tonight is our next to last meeting, and our final meeting is scheduled for April 2nd. I want to remind everybody, given how the COVID-19 situation is very fluid, we may not have the meeting on April 2nd. We will keep everyone posted, including those at home, what the plan is for moving forward with meetings and assemblies of people, including our committee. So at the end of this meeting, we're hoping that the committee will reach a preliminary consensus on all the middle school boundaries. Now, before we get going on the map, I have 3 issues I want to address with you. Those issues are the revised projections that we received, SUMA, and portables. So if you have questions about those, let me get through these items here first, and then we can have that conversation. So as you've seen, we've adjusted the student enrollment projections for the Springville attendance area. And I'll be the first to admit, ideally, we would not be doing this now. We would have had the correct projections for you initially. However, we reviewed those projections, our projections, and the PSU projections based on the testimony from the public and at least one committee member asking the question. There is no ulterior motive. There is no conclusion that we as staff are trying to reach. We are trying to give you the best information that we can provide you. So we reviewed the enrollment numbers initially in one of the areas, original development areas of Springville, which is right in the immediate neighborhood of the Springville school. So south of Brugger, but north of Springville Road. We saw a pattern that after about 2 years of time in the neighborhood, once it was developed and had those initial home sales, the resident student growth showed a steady decline from those initial years, as we would expect. Once the neighborhood began to age, the number of resident students have plateaued and remained stable or even experienced a slight decrease as time goes on. This is expected. This is when a new neighborhood comes in. There are no students and lots of homes sold at one time. And as the neighborhood matures, the home sales are much less, and so getting to a stable or even a gradual decline is expected. So the areas, and you can see on the screen behind me, the areas north of Brugger Road are the areas where new development and initial home sales are taking place or recently occurred in comparison to the areas south of Brugger Road or in the immediate vicinity of the Springville School. There are 2 larger parcels remaining for development, and some subdivisions are completing their sales. We expect that the same type of neighborhood maturation will take place in the northern part of the Springville attendance area in the coming years. When the Sato boundary was established a couple of years ago, it absorbed the bulk of the remaining growth areas from Springville. And there was at least one older neighborhood that was combined with the Sato attendance area. So the area south of Springville Road is a mature area, and the projections reflect this. The projections we're using reflect this stable resident condition. The areas north of Springville Road are growing, and they're growing with the same rapidity as the Springville area has in the past. And additional land in that area, much more than in the Springville area, has yet to be developed. So in looking at these areas, we concluded that adjusting the projections for the Sato area wasn't warranted. So when we finished our review of this, we went to our colleagues at Portland State in the Population Center and asked them, okay, here are our assumptions. This is what we did. Does this, work for you? And they concurred with our approach, and that their assumptions used in the original forecast may have relied too heavily on the past development and student growth that's occurred over the years in that Springville area. So they agreed that resident student growth would continue in the Springville area, but not in as aggressive rate as originally assumed. So that's it for prepared statement on the projections. Let me move to SUMA here. As we noted in our staff memorandum, we're requesting that the committee no longer debate locations about SUMA. The SUMA numbers that you have in your maps, those are the resident students for the boundary that you're looking at. So we're taking the SUMA students from those feeder elementary schools that will be attending Stoller and Timberland. So they're resident students. And we wanted to include this information to you because they are resident students. Whether SUMA exists in those locations or not, those students are still let's, just for argument's sake, SUMA goes away. Those students would be going to that school. Now, if SUMA were to leave, we don't know how many of those students would stay at the middle school or would go to the new location of SUMA. So teaching and learning will still make the decision on SUMA locations, which will be in the 2021-22 school year. We have to be certain about the capacity of the schools. We have to understand what the impact on a legacy status is to any program. If there's a legacy program, families choosing to opt into those legacy programs, and for these newer students moving into middle school, how many are going to actually enroll in the SUMA program. With respect to portables, we have, we've kind of danced around this a bit, and I want to be clear. Our board expectation is that portables are not being used at any middle school as an outcome of this boundary adjustment. That's the reason why we have 90%, approximately 90% of permanent capacity for the Stoller Middle School, because that's where the greatest number of portables are and the greatest number of students. However, the use of portables is possible in the future depending on what happens in a specific area. So for example, if SUMA moved out of Stoller, those SUMA students that are resident students, they may go to the different location, they may choose to stay. Legacy will have an impact on that as well. So the district has to have the flexibility of, depending on how many students actually enroll in the school, on whether or not portables will be used. Our intention is not to use portables. Okay? That's it in terms of my prepared statement. So we're going to go into the maps, and I'm going to stop talking here in just a moment. For everybody, I want to note that we've provided a memorandum from the Transportation Department illustrating the estimated ride times for Springville driving to Stoller and Springville driving to Five Oaks. And we provided transportation data for estimated ride times from Findlay to Stoller and Findlay to Timberland. This is important on the Findlay side because there are new routes that would be established if all of Findlay would go to Timberland. Also, we have provided an update to the two maps showing the grid code projections for 2021 and 2025. And for those of you who are watching, those items are on our webpage. So tonight, I recommend that we proceed in the following order. We resolve the Stoller Middle School boundary. We resolve the Timberland boundary. We resolve the remaining boundaries, and then we discuss a potential legacy program for students. So that's the recommendation of how we proceed, and as promised, I will stop talking right now. And Abhijit has his card up first, so we'll start with Abhijit.
Thank you, Jason, to let me pitch in this time. Just joking. Couple questions, Steve. Can you clarify again on the portables used? From what you said, my understanding is portables are not to be used as a source of capacity to accommodate SUMA. However, they can be used to accommodate resident students should either they not leave or should the population projections be wrong or other things.
That is correct. So the portables are not to be used other than accommodating resident students.
Okay. And the second question is, so after the boundary change happens, including all the options program, whether it's SUMA or Richard Carson, the board's expectation is all 9 middle schools will end up with in 2025 using no portables. Is that correct?
That is the goal, understanding that there are factors beyond our control right now to predict in terms of what may happen, but yes, we want to have a resulting attendance boundary that we do not have to come back and revise or otherwise say school A has a larger average student count in a class as opposed to school B.
Okay. And one last thing is, I was going to suggest, can we spend a few minutes talking about legacy first? I mean, I know it's going to be a recommendation just like everything else, but depending on what that outcome is, we have to make certain assumptions, and that changes the math. And it's really a question of whether we recommend just the 8th graders or the 7th and 8th graders. So maybe it's a short discussion now. I would like to request that.
So I'm game if the committee's game, but this is going to be majority rules in moving forward. So does anybody want to talk or have any questions about talking about legacy first before I open it up to any kind of vote for you all? Charisse.
I'm certainly game to talk about it if it's something that is in our factors that is going to be looked at. If that is something that either the ed department or that the school board is going to take up only, then I don't want to use our valuable time to do that. So I don't know if you can answer that, Stephen.
Yeah, ultimately that's going to be a district decision on offering legacy, but committees are more than able to provide that recommendation. Mike can tell you that we had that conversation at the El Monica boundary discussion, so it's certainly with precedent to do. So, okay, I'm going to ask the question, and instead of asking you each to speak about it, we'll do the hand raising. We'll see if this works this time. Hand raising, do you want to talk about legacy at this point now? And if you do, please raise your hand. Okay, so we'll table that and talk about it later. All right, thank you, Abhijit. So moving forward, I do want to have us spend time talking about the Stoller boundary, because that is the critical, I think that's the critical component for us to be able to flow from there. So, in talking about Stoller, again, the map has not changed from February 25th, specific to Stoller. We have changed the projections on that, and I've explained why we did that. I'd like to open it up to your discussion at this point on Stoller and any thoughts that you have, particularly since the meeting on the 25th. I will note for the record and for everybody who is watching, we have received a lot of comments from the affected schools, including Findlay, and there have been a lot of comments about blocking Findlay, and you have seen in the staff memorandum our projections for students in that area immediately south of Laidlaw Road. It was, I think we called it the Oak Ridge Estates area last time, but what we have shown to you in this material includes all the grid codes south of Laidlaw, but north of Bronson Creek. So I have Jason with his card up first, and I don't see another card, so Jason, take it away.
And just so we're absolutely clear, you talk about those three, it's the same three grid codes we talked about before, but dispensing with any notion of splitting one, which I think we may have touched on.
Correct.
Okay. And so I saw in your memorandum, your recommendation was to treat any change there as a separate boundary exercise, is that correct?
That's correct. And again, for everybody's understanding, that is a separate boundary adjustment on the elementary school level.
Correct. And should we stay clear of it entirely, or should we make similar to what we were talking about in relation to potentially SUMA, making a recommendation to the district to have a look at that?
I think it would be fine to have the committee recommend that for reasons such as split feeders, that looking at elementary school attendance boundaries in that particular area would be a worthy project to undertake.
Okay. So with that in mind, I could go either way. I would be in favor of voting for the map as configured. And I could honestly go either way of whether this committee wanted to, well, my preference would be to go with a recommendation that the district look at an elementary school swap to even out those numbers. I would, second choice, but still amenable, would be to boundary is drawn and then creating a split for those 3 grid codes. I'll offer that for comment from fellow committee members.
So, Abhijit, you're...
So after reading your AC report, that's a big split than what we initially thought. And Finley is reducing volume, so I wouldn't really want to do a split. In fact, this map is almost no split except for middle school to high school boundaries where the elementaries are split. So I would not recommend that. I think the one thing I would like is with Timberland getting overpopulated and Oak Hills going there, and Stoller being closer to Oak Hills. So the Oak Hills East part, that is 60 sunset feeding kids. If we choose to split them out of Oak Hills West, I would recommend that go to Stoller. That will bring the 2021 number to 90%. And 2025 will be about 105. And if that option is okay, we can obviously work around ages to get the 105 down a little bit.
So I would just so I'm clear, are you suggesting, can you, why don't you repeat that suggestion?
So the Oak Hills East Sunset Feeder part, which has 60 sunset feeding kids. The 2 schools that are closer to it is obviously the middle part, which is it's feeding in, and Stoller. And instead we are sending it to Timberland. Right? So having that feed into Stoller will make 2021 number at 90% and 2025 about 105% for net residents.
You're suggesting Oak Hills East
Yes.
move to Stoller.
Yeah, the one part that's right below Jacob.
Oak Hills East is the elementary school.
So the Oak Hills East Elementary School,
Moving to,
Yes.
yes, moving to Stoller. Yeah.
all right. All right.
Why do you recommend that? Sorry.
Yeah, so if what Steve initially mentioned was the portables won't be source of capacity for SUMA kids. So in this map, Stoller will be using about 5 portables if SUMA kids remain there in 2025. Right? So if you just focus on the net residents minus SUMA, right? You want to keep space in Timberland. And Oak Hills is feeding all the way east to Timberland. So instead of creating overcapacity in a school that does not have portable, we can feed that in Stoller. We'll bring the 2021 numbers to 90% for net residents. And we'll bring the sunset feeder population, I mean, it's already close to 200, it could go above that. And 2025 numbers will come to 105-ish. And there could be ways to bring that down. That is what I would suggest.
Okay, so I understand the suggestion, and to restate the rationale is that it would add sunset feeding high school students to Stoller thus increasing the percentage of sunset feeding students from Stoller in response to many of the comments we've heard about the number of sunset feeding students from Wismer area families. Okay, all right. I think Divya, yours was up first, and then we'll go over to Christy.
So if I got that correct, I think you're going back to referring to net students, and I think that's exactly what Steve said we should not be doing, I thought, right? So we should be looking at the resident students for the numbers to work. So for going back to your theory, Oak Hills East, if that need to come to Stoller, that means someone is to move, which is again out of our purview. So I'm not suggesting we take that out, number one. Number two, there are students in Springville coming from north. It is hard for me to justify Oak Hills East who wanted to go to Timberland, divert them to Stoller while Springville goes elsewhere. That's all I have.
Okay, Christy and then Charisse.
Thanks, Steve. Kind of looking holistically at the overall district, when we concentrate all of the numbers in Stoller and Timberland, looking at the rest of the district, when you divide out the number of remaining students among the 7 remaining schools, in 2025, it's an average of 763 students. And so when we get into 2025, all of the other middle schools in the southern part of the district are going to be well below the required capacity. And so my concern is if we start with Stoller and say we're going to approve this boundary for Stoller, we're not going to have any other students to distribute in the southern part of the district.
So Christy, let me make one clarification on your comment. The goal, the ideal goal for enrollment size at middle schools is around 800 students. So it's not a requirement, but it is the ideal enrollment. Charisse, and then Monica.
I absolutely agree with Divya and with Christy. I don't think there's a way for us to pull Oak Hills to Stoller without pulling Springville out. There's just no way to do that. Looking at resident population, I completely understand why, and putting more kids together. But I do think we need to listen to Oak Hills and have them feed to Timberland as they have asked to if we were able to do that. And Christy, just to echo your point, I think that if we have a way to balance the kids throughout the district, then we need to do that, and we need to do that with a look at equity, and we need to do that with a look at all the different factors that we have. And I agree with you, I think it's easier to start pulling those southern boundaries so that we end up with a situation in the north that makes sense.
Okay. Monica and then Mike.
So echoing that sentiment, I don't agree with moving Oak Hills into Stoller. Oak Hills has wanted to stay with Terralinda and go to Timberland, and we've closed on that. If we need to put more sunset feeders, we need to put it from Philly, because that's what they're asking for.
Okay. Mike, and then Jason.
Thank you, Steve. I consider the Oak Hills issue closed, so I'm going to move ahead to the question at hand, which was the Stoller boundary. I do support the Stoller boundary as is on the presented map tonight, with the following addition, and that is adding the 61 students who are, according to the district, walkable. I don't understand how the district came up with the 106 capacity number. When I look at this, the net resident students for Stoller without SUMA are 908 students. We add 61 students, we get 970 students, so still near the 90% capacity. And then the district is going to have to decide what they want to do with SUMA after that. In my opinion, I do prioritize children who can walk to their neighborhood school over the SUMA program.
Okay. Jason.
Just very quick, because there's been a little bit of discussion that I think some of what Abhijit was talking about was jumping ahead to looking over at Timberland. Also some of the comments about not concentrating too much to the north. I think we will get there as we talk about Timberland. I agree we need to pull more people south. I think this map is drawn, pulls 2 schools south. I think what remains is to pull another one south from Timberland, but we will get there. So I would echo that we should vote on the map as drawn, and we can discuss how we couch the modification around the walkable area.
Okay, no one on stage left, so Charisse.
Steve, can you address Michael's comment about the net resident students at 908? Does that include that SUMA population, or is that SUMA population including students that are going to SUMA from outside of Stoller that are currently in Stoller boundary? Where is that coming from?
So the numbers that you have in the staff report, and for everybody watching, it's on page 3 of the staff memorandum. The number of 1,142 resident students, again, that includes the SUMA population that are resident students in that boundary. So all we've done is we've added the area south of Laidlaw Road as part of, okay, your resident students of Stoller. Correct. In the memorandum, page 3.
So Stephen, are these not correct numbers then?
Those numbers are correct for the boundary as shown behind me up on the screen. So it does not include those walkable areas.
The 61.
Robert's checking the numbers here.
And the 3 on this map here for 21, I see 10, 24, and 4 in those 3 grid codes. So where do we get 61?
That includes resident SUMA students at Stoller. If those resident students were not at Stoller, it would be 948 for 88%.
Steve, can I speak?
We're looking at the maps to make sure that we're getting our addition correctly. All right, well, Robert's working on that. We'll.
What it is these numbers do not include SUMA students.
I see.
Yeah, so there's a few SUMA students.
So-
These do not include the SUMA students.
So we can hear that online. The numbers that we were looking at on the work map for the grid codes does not include the SUMA students residing in those grid codes. All right, John.
Thanks, Stephen. Just to ask the same question in a very direct way, with the work map that we would be voting on in a moment, what is the percentage and population that we should be thinking of when we vote? Because I see potentially I could be thinking of it at 100 or 79 if I have the portables, which I think I'm not doing, or different numbers. I just want to be like, if we're taking all of the recommendations you said in your opening comments, what would be the population of Stoller and the percentage of total permanent capacity?
So as you are seeing here in the map that shows Springville, Sato, and Wismar, with the resident SUMA kids in Stoller, you're at 100%. 100% capacity of the building at Stoller.
So that's just the resident students in the new map?
That is just the resident students in 2021. Okay? If you were to add the students south of 26, or south of Laidlaw, I'm sorry, you're now at 106 capacity, which is the 61 students over. Yeah, why don't you do that? So, again, keeping in mind for your thought process here, if you were to include just that walkable portion of Findlay into the attendance area, we would have more resident students than what is we have room for at Stoller in the permanent building. That puts us about 60, as I said, about 61 students over. The number of kids in a classroom could probably take that, but you are then creating potential inequities of classroom experience between this school and another school. We talked about having an over-enrollment at Woodford at one point, and it was about, I believe, about 40 or 30 students, and that equated to basically an extra kid per classroom. So a reasonable impact to absorb. So I give that to you not as direction, but for consideration. Divya, you were next.
I actually am not sure if that number 61 students over is accurate, because I'm looking at the projected resident students, and that entire gray area in Findlay that is walking is totaling up to 120 kids, resident students. So the current boundary, if I'm adding that 120, it puts us way above 106%, and 120 children more than what's being shown in this map. So I'm unclear, where is that 61 coming? I mean, I understand it could translate to small number, but 61 versus 121 is a huge difference.
Right, and I would have to wait for Robert to come back and talk about those maps, since he's the one who created them. Abhijit, I think you were next.
So I think the 3 grid codes that you mentioned, the numbers from the projected residents do match up, and I think you have given the total numbers. That includes so and everything.
That's correct.
And once you take that out, that's what you see in this map. So that's what is causing confusion. While I agree with Mike that walkability in front of Stoller should take priority, this goes too deep. And like I said, Findlay as is a small school, and everywhere else we have tried to mitigate the splits, and I would still recommend that we should go with no split, because this is taking maybe 1/3, not 1/3, but quite a big chunk out of a smaller school.
Okay. I'm going to go to Jason and then Christy.
Hearing the comments, here's the proposal I would make on what to vote for. It's the map as configured, with a recommendation that the district can consider a elementary school boundary adjustment that would elementary and middle school boundary adjustment to accommodate those 3 grid codes, and potentially balancing out with an accommodating reassignment. And a recommendation that teaching and learning move the SUMO program as they see fit to balance enrollment. I think that's where we left it last time. We simply said it was, all we can do is make a recommendation, and I think that should be in there without being too prescriptive about it.
Okay. Chrissy, your name is on the floor, so you've lost your chance. Christy and then Sharice.
This may be an unpopular opinion or option, but I would like to consider moving all of Findlay back into Stoller and moving Springville to Five Oaks. Because Findlay is small, Springville is a very large school, and when you try to fit both Springville and Salto, the two largest schools in the school district, into one middle school, I still just don't believe it's going to work. So I would like to see all of Findlay, all of Jacob Wisner, and all of Salto attending Stoller Middle School.
Okay, we'll go with Sharice and then Monica.
And I have a feeling that Robert is bringing us some new numbers. I really would like some clarification on these percentages on whether or not they are true net residents that include SUMA or not, so that we have a true idea of what we're actually looking at in this number. I agree with Christy. I think there is no way that we can keep both Springville and Sato and Stoller. It doesn't work if we're going to get to that 90%. And I know it's not popular, and I think we need to figure it out, because if we want to put together more than one recommendation that includes something for teaching and learning and moving SUMA, that's great, but we also need to give an option that follows the objectives that we've been asked to put together by the board.
Monica and then Marnie.
My recommendation is the same. I wanted to discuss moving Findlay into Stoller and moving Springville out. And that's part of the reason I feel like we're forcing it, it's not working. But also, I think that we have a lot of work to do with Meadow Park and Five Oaks, and I'd like to move forward to that as well.
Okay. Marnie and then Sean.
Ditto what Monica just said.
Okay. Sean and then Mike.
I just want to agree with what everyone else is saying about moving Findlay and Springville down to Five Oaks.
Okay. And Mike.
Well, I guess it would be the devil's advocate here, because as strongly as Christy feels about moving it, I feel strongly the exact opposite. It makes zero sense to me to move Springville, one of the farthest schools from Five Oaks, to put them on that bus, take them completely out of their community, and send them down to Five Oaks. I think that's a horrible idea, so I would not support it.
Okay. We'll do Matt and then Jason.
Sorry, it's your space. I wholeheartedly agree with Michael. I think I felt like we kind of got there already, so I'm thoroughly opposed to that idea. But could we get an update on what this is now?
Yeah, so Robert's going to, so just hang on a second. Good conversation. Robert's going to explain his numbers here. We will do John and then Abhijit.
Okay, so if we look at this map, up at the top, you'll want the projection year 2021. It says Findlay Walk Zone, adjacent only to Stoller. You'll notice that around the, just below the Jacob Wisner attendance boundary, it's a little dotted line. That's the area that's been put in back here. So if we go over to the Stoller column and we look down, we'll see that there's a total resident population of 1239 under this configuration. 97 kids come out and go to options. 194 are assumed to be in SUMA, for a total of 948 net resident students who would be at Stoller under this configuration if there was no SUMA. If we add that 194 back to the 498, to the 948, we get 1142. So the school is at 106. To the right, you'll see the same configuration of Timberland and Stoller, each one getting all of, or with Timberland getting all of the SUMA and Stoller getting none. And again, Stoller is at 948. So the resident population, assuming that Summa is not there, would be under the 90% for this map. But if Summa remains whole or in part, then the school will be over in 2021.
So for the record and folks that are watching online, we're going to make this map that we just talked about, we'll post it on our webpage and everybody's going to be able to see that. And Robert will do some mad emailing to our assistant and we'll get that out as soon as possible. Okay, so I believe I said John.
Thank you, Stephen. Just to go to the point that Christy raised, I do take the side with Michael, and that is I am opposed to moving Springville. If you all recall, prior to our last meeting, was strongly suggesting that we would make that decision last, because I think there are lots of choices and we will continue to be stuck on this one for a long, long time. If we continue, we're going to just keep going. But I do think if I had to put it out to the place where we're at now, I would choose to not meet the board objective exactly and have a slightly over capacity or at capacity Stoller than move the Springville students. I think it's a good option for Finley to go to Timberland, and it's a good option for Springville to stay. To create the change for those Springville students to just keep to an exact number that the board recommended is not acceptable to me. I don't think it's a math problem where we have to hit a number. I think it's all of the lives that we're impacting that matter to me. And I think that moving those Springville kids would create a change that I'm not willing to propose or vote for. So that's the comment I have on that.
Okay, Jason was next. Then we'll do Abhijit and then Marty.
And I'm going to agree with everything John just said and the way he said it. I mean, I see my role here as trying to make sure that the community values are injected in this process. And the tens of thousands of comments I read, I believe, echo what he has just said. So I'm not even going to go any more that. I'll make two other points. One is that it's also just almost unconscionable to me that the closest school in the Stoller boundary that we would, to Timberland, that we would not move them there. It just defies my sense of logic. And I would also just make this point that as much as it's an obvious choice to me to not move Springville, just for its own sake, for the impact on that community, what goes even beyond that to me is all the maps we've seen that have moved to Five Oaks, it's the negative impact on the southern schools that are forced. It's moves we are forced to make that are negative for those communities only because we're making space for them. If there were 15 other people here who were just intent on moving Springville, I would be back lobbying for the idea of moving Springville to Timberland before I inflict all of that other change on those southern schools.
Okay, Abhijit, we'll go to Marty, Monica, and then Yasmin.
So to John's point, the math actually does work. So it's not even not meeting the board objectives. So yes, we let the learning department make its decision. But with the night resident students, it does work. Right? It's at 84% and 101%. And 16 kids over capacity is not going to require portable. So even if you assume the existing Summa acceptance rates, and it's about 80%, so some of those kids come back, you would still not require portable. Last time, I thought the main reason for rejecting was, first of all, confusion between with Summa and without Summa numbers. And without Summa, it was at 114%. Now it is at 101%. So I'm not sure what, although Christy has a point, and I do agree with her completely that the Stoller community as such is made of these schools, and feeding will make sense. But for this map, for these numbers, if you're rejecting it for numbers, that cannot be the reason, because the numbers are working.
Marnie?
Okay, so with respect to what you're saying about Springville and the numbers working, I understand that and I respect that. I just want to make sure that I point out moving forward that everyone has hears, oh, community, oh, together. And if you look down at Westview and Rock Creek and Bethany and sending them all the way to Meadow Park, that's significantly farther than Springville to Five Oaks. So as we move forward, please keep that in mind about community and schools that we're sending all the way away. I realize Stoller is important, and I think we probably should vote to move forward because there's definitely some other things we need to address.
Monica and then Yasmin.
I appreciate that Springville is not very close to Five Oaks. I am looking at several other elementary school to middle school separations that are equidistant. So I do not want to continue to talk about Springville being far away from middle school, and then that's halting an entire decision. Like we can't focus on that one factor. I don't think it's working. I think we have to consider something else, and I'm really unhappy with the Meadow Park map, and I want it to be more cohesive because that's two separate populations. I want to move forward.
Yasmin. And then Mike after that.
So I also feel strongly against taking Springville to Five Oaks. And the text of the boundary goal is approximately 90%. And so we don't really have to be at 89 or anything. The comment about community is very valid, and we have really to keep that in mind in the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you. I do agree with Annika. A lot of work needs to be done with respect to Meadow Park and Marnie, and I look forward to getting there. So, to that end, I would propose that we vote at this time with respect to the Springville, Findlay, etc., Stoller boundary. I think we're ready. We can talk about this all night. I don't think you're going to convince anyone. So I propose we move to it.
So, I'm reading the same message here in the room. What I'm going to do is we're not going to do the hand raising on this. We're going to go around the room and say yay or nay to a motion. The motion, I will prepare it and propose it to you. If there are modifications to the motion after we've done a vote, I'm more than happy to consider those as we go forward, but I want to get to a base decision on Stoller at this point, okay? So, the vote before us is, do you, yes or no, approve the map that's dated March 12th that you have in front of you showing Springville, Sato, and Wismer going and constituting the feeder pattern to Stoller Middle School. And what I'll do is, just for the sake of the cameras, I will start with Marnie. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the south of Laidlaw Road. It is only what I offered, which is, again, Springville, Sato, Wismer. That is a base map. If there are amendments, which may include the walkable Findlay, we can talk about those next, but we need to make a decision on Stoller, at least an initial one. So we'll start with Marnie, we'll go to Christy, and we'll work our way up. Okay, so Marnie.
Yes.
Christy.
No.
Jason.
Yes.
Pratika.
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Sean.
No.
John.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Yasmin.
Yes.
Monica.
No.
Divya.
No.
Michelle.
Do I get to make a comment or just a yes or no?
It's a yes or no.
Uh,
I'm gonna start playing the Jeopardy thing.
I know. I guess I have to say yes.
Charisse,
No.
Matt,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Abdul has been watching and sent us an email, and this is what he says. Hi, I believe we could recommend the map as is, being slightly above 90%. Yes, signed Abdul. So, my count here is I have 11 yeses and 5 noes. So, Robert, do you agree? Okay. So the yeses have it in terms of a base map for Stoller being those 3 schools. Now, I will entertain a vote on adding the walkable portion of Findlay, and the walkable portion is only the area south of Laidlaw and north of Bronson Creek. It's 3 grid codes. It does not include the Findlay area north of Laidlaw, nor does it include the Findlay area south of Bronson Creek. Is that okay? I'm going to call a vote on that. Jason.
You recommend this vote is as a split, because we've talked about a couple scenarios.
So this is as a split, and we can continue to talk about whether or not there's a recommendation for a boundary adjustment after that. So, any other questions about that? Divya?
Since the map went through and is at 100% Stoller, do we need to take votes on adding more students?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
So the map, March 12th, we just voted on it and we got 11 votes, right? So,
Yes.
and it is showing 100% already. So why are we talking about adding more students?
So that is the question that would then be, the logical conclusion would be it would defer to the teaching and learning department that SUMA would then have to be relocated to a different school site.
There's 2 comments, like what Marnie said, we have been talking about keeping communities together, and this is going to split Findlay. And I agree with you, we are now already talking about putting it overpopulation, where you spent first 5 minutes telling us the direction we all wanted for the last 4 months, which was whether we should use portables or not. And once portables are out, this is, and I don't agree with your Voodoo math of 1 kid per class if you had 60, but that aside, this is just adding more kids, isn't it?
Right, it is. It is doing that. However, I heard discussion that people, at least some people on the committee, wanted to consider it. So if the vote is no, the vote's no, but I'm going to call the question, okay? Yeah.
So in doing this, if in us doing this, it would tie teaching and learning's hands and having to move somewhere, then great, I'm all for it, because I believe in that walkability. But if they're going to use the portables, then I think that is disservice to the students going to Stoller. So I guess my question really is more of a teaching and learning question. What causes these decisions? Is it capacity? Is it portable use? Is it class size? What really drives that SUMA decision? Because frankly, that will drive my vote for this.
So Ken, why don't you come on up and make sure that microphone is on.
That's great.
Okay, that's a policy JC amendment, right? Working microphones needed.
It's actually operator error.
I think it's operator error, exactly, I apologize. We would look at capacity of the building as a primary factor. Again, trying to balance out proximity. Ideally, we would have critical masses within the catchment, but if the capacity at that neighborhood school had already been reached, the guidance we have from the board is that portables are not part of the capacity that's in play. So we would have a plan that would accommodate the needs of SUMA qualified students that chose to participate that would be outside of their neighborhood school.
Okay, so just to recap, and Divya, thank you for bringing what happened at the board meeting to our attention. It was a clear directive from the board that we were not to be tasked to be messing with SUMA and that it was net residents. So can you speak to that in the terms of looking at this vote? We do this, we have filled Stoller beyond capacity. So how, in your judgment, what would happen without obviously holding you to that?
And clearly, I think Steve did a good job of articulating that there are a lot of variables at play that families will navigate about legacy and continuing in a neighborhood school, even if they leave SUMA to accomplish that, or whether or not they take SUMA eligibility to pursue that based on perceptions about where that is. But that being said, I think we have a responsibility to look at long-term sustainability, that we don't want to be locating SUMA areas, SUMA programs in areas where we cannot sustain that program at that site in the long term. Those sort of disruptions would be counterproductive. So if we saw a trend where the capacity at the school had already been recommended and approved by our board and we couldn't sustain the program there, we would have to be moving them to a different school. And we would try to use our judgment to make that as proximate as possible. And again, trying to make sure that we have concentrations of students that allow the full acceleration of mathematics. That's a critical factor, that if we get too small groups, that doesn't seem reasonable, that we cannot have equity of, for example, a math class with 5 students would not be an outcome we would want to see. So we'll be really thoughtful about the complexities of that.
Don't go anywhere yet. Jason.
We'll turn it off. Just a quick question, Teresa. I was at the board meeting. I would not characterize the comment that Divya quoted as a clear directive from the board. It was a comment that I think was being interpreted from one particular board member at the end of a presentation. It was not a clear directive.
I'm not seeing it that way. It's more of a comment, but I do think it goes back to the policy factors of net resident students and not SUMA.
Right. Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Starkmeyer, unless you're here to vote. Yeah. All right. So the question is, should the area south of Laidlaw Road, should that Finley neighborhood be included as a feeder to Stoller? Okay. Recognizing that doing so would be creating approximately 61 additional resident students for Stoller. Okay? We'll go down the same list here. So, Marty?
Sorry, would you repeat it?
So the question is, it's a up or down vote. Should the area south of Laidlaw Road, that portion of Finley, should that become a part of the resident student feeder to Stoller?
No.
Christy?
I mean, if we're already going to say we can go to 100%, then yes.
Jason?
No, but I look forward to voting on a elementary redesign.
Pratika?
No, but I agree with Jason about voting on the elementary foundation.
Jennifer?
No.
Sean,
No.
John,
Yes.
Abhijit.
No, and one comment, even if you do elementary boundary adjustment, the math for Stoller is going to remain the same.
Do a compensating.
Yeah, Yasmin,
No.
Monica,
Yes, but I would also support the elementary school change.
Divya,
No.
Michelle,
No.
Charisse,
Yes.
Matt,
No.
Mike.
Yes.
All right, I have not received an email from Abdul, but let's do a quick count here. I have 10 no's, and that would mean 5 yeses, so. Okay, so the walkable portion of Findlay being added to Stoller as a split is no, that fails. Okay. I did hear 3 people wanting to vote on the elementary school recommendation as another way of addressing that particular question. So here is the question. Again, it is an up or down question. Does the committee want to recommend that the board consider directing an elementary school boundary adjustment that would include the area south of Shoals Ferry, north of Bronson Creek, not Shoals Ferry, sorry. I've been trying to call it Highway 26, and now I've gone even further south, sorry. It is Laidlaw, yes. Thank you. My thanks to the peanut gallery. Okay, let me restate this. The question is, does the committee want to recommend that the board consider a boundary adjustment, an elementary school boundary adjustment, wherein the portion of the Findlay elementary school attendance area south of Laidlaw, north of Bronson Creek, be considered for a boundary adjustment to Wismer as a part of a larger elementary school boundary adjustment project? Any questions on that question? Yasmin.
So, if such exercise happens, will this be before the school year 2021, or will this be in the future?
That would be the recommendation, to make it a boundary adjustment process that we would do next school year. And it would be a public process. It would not be Robert and I cooking the numbers and saying this is what you're going to do. So, John.
Thanks, Stephen. I just would be interested from those of you who are Wismer or Findlay or somewhere in that neighborhood to talk about this just for a minute, because this was a question, or I guess I asked the community to bring comments about the split. This to me is still splitting that community. It's just moving schools, and the new communities will form, and I understand over time it's a new community. But just if someone who's more familiar with that could talk, because as I've read the comments on the split there, I really see what I'd say is somewhere around 50-50 or 40-60 on if we should do that. Break that group up there. So if they're concerned about the split, they'd certainly be concerned about this. So just be interested in those who have very specific understanding of that neighborhood to talk about what this would do.
All right, so first we'll have Abhijit and then Divya, who happen to be the 2 representatives from those schools for representing the Stoller attendance area, and then we will call the question. So Abhijit, you first.
So first I want to ask my question, John, and then I'll get you. The pamphlet that you gave us on the elementary enrollment and capacity has Jacob Wismer a space of about 22 kids. So adding these many kids in Jacob does not have space. That's one. The second thing is Sato is growing, and Sato is going to need to give some. And it can only give it to its neighbors, and not all of that is going to go to Springwood. So some of that has to come to Jacob. So while we can entertain the hypothetical situation that you recommended, you are going to have to do lots of somersaults to get this to work in the elementary boundary adjustment. Right? If we were to focus on who is in front of Stoller and accommodate them, I would again go back to the point I made last time, where the east of Jacob, which is after Laidlaw, and that is in the same area as the Bannister Creek that is in Findlay. We already got from community feedback they have backyard parties or neighborhood parties, block parties. If that part moves to Findlay, then at least there is capacity. So we should entertain, every idea is a good idea, but this is clearly not going to work in numbers unless we move that. So if you're going to recommend a motion with both, then that at least has some legs. Now coming back to John, your question, that's a tough one to answer, and I'll just say this, we are not elected officials, so we don't represent the community. But I'll say this, one thing I'll say is walkability, as some of you said, is a privilege. It's not. It's just some parents prioritize that over everything else when buying a house. And the elders always tell us, do your priorities, do your budget, and go for it. Right? So those who are in front of Stoller, like Jason had said, if they see it, they want to go there. But we are very close community in terms of Findlay. And yes, any elementary that can stand together tends to win. You just saw the 11-5 vote that speaks to it, right? So it's more of the sentiments, right? I would not counter their sentiments, because if I would see Stoller, I don't know what I would say, but and I'll just leave it at that before I make too much fool of myself.
All right, Divya.
So I don't live in the Friendly area, but I'm in the Jacob-Wismar neighborhood, so I can only speak from the outside in view. I do know that Oak Ridge 3 grid codes you're talking, they can literally see Stoller. And that blue line that is dividing Jacob-Wismar and Findlay boundary, that is actually a main street. It's Laidlaw, it's busy, especially school pickup drop-off time, it's impossible to cross the roads. Going to the southwest corner of Findlay, which is also marked as walkable on this map, that is actually tightly connected to Oak Ridge. So there is internal streets connecting Oak Ridge to that backside neighborhood. So if you only take the 3 grid codes in Oak Ridge and not the rest of the southwest corner, I think that is dividing the community. Oak Ridge is the 3 grid codes that we got from 10, 24, and 4. That's Oak Ridge. Yeah, those are all connected. Those are also connected is what I'm saying. So grid codes 6, 10, 7, 4 are also connected to Oak Ridge Estates.
So the question, Divya's feedback, thank you. The question, though, is for just the Findlay area north of Bronson Creek. And on the grid code map, it's those 3 grid codes that have, and this is for the 2021 grid codes, has going from west to east, 10, 24, and 4, which is the area that is highlighted in the map that Robert handed out a few moments ago. Okay, so I'm going to call the question again, and this is, again, recommend to the board that an elementary school boundary adjustment be considered that would move that portion that I just listed of the Findlay area as a part of a larger elementary school boundary adjustment, moving that to the Jacob-Wismar attendance area, which would then be feeding to Stoller Middle School. Marnie. I'm sorry. Michelle?
Is there a compensating move?
That would have to be part of the larger conversation and looking at elementary school boundaries in the area.
Okay.
Divya.
So that is 61 children walking. And I also read in the AC report that if these students come in, Summa is likely to move out because the capacity is not there in the building anymore. So that means we are displacing 94 of Jacob Wismer kids. Yes, I'm getting Finley 61 children, but I'm displacing 94 Jacob Wismer Summa children along with St. and Springville Summa children. Just want committee to be aware of that. You're taking walking is what we're thinking, but no, actually we are going to put more buses, more kids in the buses because of Summa relocation.
Okay. Marnie.
So we're just recommending that someone else takes a closer look at it.
We go through a public process to consider doing that, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Christy.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
Ritika.
Yes.
Jennifer.
No.
John.
No.
John.
Yes.
Abhijit.
No.
Yasmin.
No.
Monica.
Yes.
Divya.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Sharice.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
And Mike.
Yes.
I have 9 yeses. That would mean 6 noes. And let me see if I have anything from Abdul. I do not. Okay, so that is a motion, or that is a vote that passes. So for the Stoller issue, the Stoller area, for sure, the recommendation of this committee is Springville, Sato, and Jacob Wismer will feed Stoller Middle School. To go along with that recommendation, the committee is also recommending that the board consider an elementary school boundary adjustment wherein the 3 grid codes south of Stoller Middle School, south of Laidlaw Road, and north of Bronson Creek also be considered. That would be, that's just a recommendation. The board would have to direct us to do that. Okay. So that is Stoller. I'd like to move to the Timberland attendance area here. On the map, we have all of Finley, all of Bonnie Slope, all of Cedar Hill, all of Terra Linda, and Oak Hills East. So Oak Hills east of Bethany Boulevard, feeding to the Timberland area middle school. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, observations they would like to make about that? I'm going to go with Monica, or I'm sorry, Michelle first and then to Jason.
I don't know if anybody will be able to answer this, but I was really confused by all the Oak Hills East testimony saying their kids are lonely and nobody else is going to Sunset. And then we asked for the data on the Barnes kids going to Sunset, and there is a number of them going. So I don't understand if there's some sort of community divide there or if something, I guess I'm not really sure what's going on there, and I don't know if anybody can shed some light on that.
I thought we had that someplace, didn't we?
Yeah, we were emailed.
Bear with me, we're looking for that data. Michelle, did we send that in an email?
Yes.
To you? Okay. Sorry, everyone. Please bear with us. We're looking for that.
March 9th, 10:07.
Okay, yeah, here it goes. All right. So the materials that Michelle is referring to is an email that we prepared in question that a committee member asked, is what are the number of students that attend the Sunset portion of the Barnes Elementary School? How many attend Sunset and how many go elsewhere? So in school year 2018-19, we have, out of 173 total resident students, 140 attended Sunset High School. In school year 1920, the total number of total number of Barnes students attending Sunset, there's 175 total resident students, of which 147 attend Sunset High School. So, for Barnes, on average, we'll call it 145 students. So the Sunset portion of Barnes Elementary School, over the past 2 school years, we'll say it's 145 students on average attend Sunset High School, grades 9 through 12. Each year it's about 45 students that feed to Sunset. So the freshman class on average is about 45 students. From Barnes. Combined with
East.
So we're not.
Right, but
I guess my point is we keep hearing from the Oak Hills East kids, they're like, my child went with 20 kids. But they're talking about the 20 kids that went from Oak Hills to Meadow Park to Sunset with them.
Correct.
So I guess why are those kids, I guess when I look at it, these kids go, oh, hey, we're all going to go to Mountainside together. You came from Nance Rise, I came from Shoals Heights, and they kind of find each other, right?
Right.
But it seems like in this area that's not happening. And I guess I'm just trying to understand what's happening.
I couldn't tell you what's happening in terms of middle school children finding friends, in terms of, going across elementary school lines. But if we say, let's just say, for example, there are 20 students from Oak Hills East each year entering Sunset High School, and there are 45 kids from Barnes entering Sunset. That means there are 60-odd kids at Meadow that feed into Sunset High School each year.
Right.
Okay. All right, Monica, go ahead.
So your email says 140. Right?
So you're gonna have to bring that real close. Just yank on it.
Your email says 140, right? But when I look at the map, I'm only counting about 40. What's the gap there? These are middle school.
Those are
These are middle school. Oh, that went to
resident 6th
But it's supposed to be the Barnes portion that feeds into Sunset, right? Which still only 40.
That's correct. So each year, about 45 freshmen from the Sunset portions of Barnes High School, or Barnes Elementary School, feed Sunset High School.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Divya, then Abhijit.
So I think Oak Hills East, I was one of the persons to vote yes for it. And at that time, few comments that stood out for me was the ladies who gave the testimony and also the online comments. They said that they actually formed teams with Terrell in the community because I think 26 is more of a geographical divide. Yes, Barnes Elementary does see Sunset kids, but they see the US 26 and they get to form teams with Terrell. And it seems like the community is closely knit up north. That was what resonated with me, and I think that made me vote a yes to that Oak Hills East moving to Timberland.
Abhijit. And then Jason.
So on Oak Hill side, we did hear we did hear comments from Oak Hills West saying that they actually don't like Oak Hills being split. It's again a small community, it should not go. In fact, in the last board meeting, there was a person who said the same thing. Now, the second question I really wanted to get to was, from what Mr. Struckmark said about taking board's advice and not using portables in Stoller. Now, if they want to make that decision to put in Timberland, we ought to create some space. And we're right now 80 above. And maybe we are thinking of this in the wrong way, like Marnie was suggesting. I'm thinking ahead a bit, but if Rock Creek and Bethany were to feed in Five Oaks and Terra Linda and Oak Hills remain in Meadow Park, that keeps these two communities together, that does not split Oak Hills, and that creates space in Timberland. I think that's what I was thinking.
Okay. Charisse, I'm sorry, who did I call next? Did I call you Jason? All right, so Jason, go ahead. All right, Charisse. As we camera swivels around.
No worries. Okay, so talking through this portion of Barnes that is in Meadow Park and feeding into Sunset, that is definitely a small percentage of students. And that is a dual language program, correct? Okay, which is currently feeding into Beaverton High School, right? So why wouldn't we not just advocate for a small high school boundary adjustment to have that Sunset line be changed to 26 to include all of Barnes into Beaverton High School and just fix it?
So I think that is a fine suggestion. I think it is probably about 5 years too soon, just because Barnes started their dual language here very recently. And so having fully two-way immersion, it would make more sense to do that high school boundary at a later date.
Understood. But regardless, if we don't do that, we are still putting a bunch of kids into a large high school where they know nobody, correct? Which to me is reason enough to advocate for it, regardless of the dual language that would be coming later.
Okay. Jason.
So when we're talking about the Timberland boundary, I find it really almost impossible to talk about it in relation to another school. I mean, obviously, looking at the numbers here, we need to take kids out of Timberland. I mean, we've left open a very strong likelihood that teaching and learning will need to move. I'm sorry, what did I say? Excuse you, people. I may have said the wrong word.
Removing kids from.
What I'm saying is, the map is drawn. Timberland is over fast. Okay, so we need to take kids out of Timberland. Did I not say that correctly? Okay.
It's at 95%.
Okay. So, okay. Well, here, let me jump to. Well, to answer your question, Therese, look at the numbers though. If you consider the possibility of the SUMO program going. Well, we made a. Never mind. my point will still stand, talking about it in relation to Cedar Park. You've got two schools right next to each other. One is a larger building, basically at capacity. The other one is a much smaller building that's, at 700 and falling below. There's an inequity there. You look at the free and reduced lunch numbers, you've got, I believe, 12 and 42%. That's an enormous gap for schools that are right next to each other. I'll say this also about Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson is there at Cedar Park to help bring those numbers on both counts up. And folks in the room can please correct me. In this map, I believe it is at Cedar Park. Okay. People can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection in sitting through this year, the presentation of Rachel Carson, is that the Rachel Carson students would only interact in the school with the comprehensive program students in the school they're at for PE. I believe they arrive roughly 2 hours earlier, leave roughly 2 hours earlier, and they have their own program for everything PE. So while it may be accurate to say they've brought the numbers up, they really are a very separate program. So when I look at Cedar Park and I see essentially 500 resident students, 500 kids in the comprehensive program, compared up at Timberland, it's too high. It's something that's where we need to make an adjustment. And as I look at it, where I would make the adjustment is to bring Bonnie Slope back to Cedar Park, where it's currently assigned. It's 212 kids, if I remember right, from the map here. That's going to bring Cedar Park maybe slightly over permanent capacity. We can then talk about a small adjustment to bring it, so we don't have portables in play. That's, in terms of the population I would move, that's one I would pick because it's the largest of the elementary schools feeding into Timberland, and since it would be the only sunset feeding school at Cedar, it would make up, I think, between 35 and 40% of Cedar Park. And so it's going to be best suited to accommodate that.
All right. Divya, then Sharice, then Mike.
I don't know why we are talking about Timberland boundary. I mean, the numbers look 95%, and we also decided to not talk about Suma. It's out of our purview. So assuming that Suma is going to go there, okay, let's just talk about it played out. That's going to put Jacob Ismer in exactly where Barnes is today, right? You are going to eliminate Suma kids, 97 children from Jacob Ismer. So that's going to make it down to 7%, identical to Barnes. So we are trying to solve a problem for Barnes, creating it elsewhere, trying to talk about things that we have decided, so I'm not sure if we need to reopen the Timberland boundary topic at this time.
Sharice.
I agree with Divya. The boundary as is looks fine on paper. If we are concerned about overcapacity with SUMA, then we should have been concerned with that when we were talking about Stoller. And frankly, bringing up free and reduced lunch when we left Stoller at 10% is a little bit out of our purview. If we are actually concerned about that, then we should make that change for Stoller.
Mike.
I agree with both my colleagues to the right. The updated map that Robert gave us actually shows Timberland at 89%. It meets the objective. It is filled. I would move to vote on it as is.
Okay. We'll go with Matt, then Abhijit.
Agreed with the folks on stage right. Also concerned that we're starting to carve into elementary school boundary talk. It feels like the boundary as it is fine, and I feel like we also have a lot more work to do, and we've got about 30 minutes to do it. So hopefully we can move on to some of the other agenda items.
Abhijit.
So I think, Joyce, to your question when Mr. Struckmar was answering, in this situation he said he will have to move it. And that's why we are considering, should Suma go full in Timberland, it will be over capacity, right? And sure. And in terms of your comment, the Barn Sunset portion is 86 kids, and JW Sunset is, after removing options, after removing Suma, is close to 200. So I mean, it's not in the same ballpark, and Oak is about 60. So it's a clearly different number scheme. Right? It's not in the same ballpark.
Okay, John and Jason's going to finish it.
I just want to make a quick comment. I generally agree that we need to take it to vote, but I just want to comment on Sharice, your comment about how we have to now take free and reduced lunch off the table because of what we did to Stoller, or however.
I'm saying if we're going to. What I'm saying is if we're going to bring that in as an action item and have it be a main priority, then we should have done that. I think it's a huge priority, and the fact that we left a middle school at 10% at the lowest and no one even brought it up, it's concerning that now it's this big thing.
So I just want to comment to that point. I think I understood your point. I don't agree though, because I haven't seen a reasonable map that significantly changed either Stoller or Timberland's free and reduced lunch. And I do think we have big votes coming for south of 26 that are about specifically free and reduced lunch. So I just think that comment is inaccurate to why we would need to make that decision in Timberland. I think I generally agree with the point. I just want to be careful about, I do think it's still a consideration. And because I voted for Stoller the way I did, it had nothing to do with the free and reduced lunch, other than the fact that I hadn't yet seen an alternate that could create equity across the district in a way that I wish we could.
Okay. Jason.
Yeah, to pick up on that, I mean, it's not that nobody's ever mentioned it for Stoller. We've talked about it. We've talked about that there's really no reasonable place to draw from to bring it that far north. And as I brought up before, that is not the case here. We're talking about distributing the schools that have been part of the Cedar Park community forever. Cedar Park's currently in the low 20%. It's now going to jump. According to this map, it's 42. It's really significantly higher when you realize that Rachel Carson is there. We're in a situation, and as I mentioned before, for any of the schools along 26, if you draw from above and below that line, you can have some semblance of balance in relation to the district average. If we're not, if we leave it as is, we're simply ignoring that factor. And this is it's not something about we're choosing to bring it or not. We have a requirement to evaluate all the factors.
Okay. So I'm calling the vote on the Timberland boundary as it is shown in the March 12th materials. And to relieve Marty from being the first one to vote, we're going to start with Mike and work our way down the tables. So starting with Mike, it's yay or nay?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Sharice?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Divya?
Yes.
Monica?
Yes.
Yasmin?
Yes.
Abhijit?
No.
John?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Ritika?
Yes.
Jason?
No.
Christy?
Yes.
Marty?
Yes.
All right, and Abdul just sent me an email, and he is saying yes. Abdul also sent votes on the last two items about Timberland, both of which were no, which did not change the result of the vote. So the ayes have it on the Timberland boundary. So with that, I'd like to move over to the Meadow Park boundary, where we have Rock Creek, Bethany, Oak Hills West, and Barnes feeding into Meadow Park. Monica, why don't you kick us off?
So I obviously don't like the split of Meadow Park. I would propose trading. It's fairly an even trade, not an evil trade, not an evil trade. An even trade for Rock Creek and Bethany to go into Five Oaks, and then Beaver Acres and Monica to go into Meadow Park. And Oak Hills West as well to go into Five Oaks.
So the question, or the suggestion that Monica just made is having Rock Creek, Bethany, Oak Hills move to Oak Hills West, move to Five Oaks, where Beaver Acres and Aloha Huber and a portion, the Aloha portion of El Monica, going to Meadow Park. That is in the memorandum. In the memorandum, that's what we identified as Five Oaks Middle School number 2. So that is on, starting on page 5 of the staff memorandum. And Monica, you had a comment to what I just said.
I'm still kind of open on Aloha Hoover. I think that kind of complicates things. I'm open for discussion on that one.
Okay. Mike.
I do think the free reduced lunch issue is a big issue across the entire district, and I echo what John said. If there were a viable option to address that in schools farther north, I certainly would have considered that. There just simply wasn't. I also do not believe that there was a viable option with respect to Cedar Park, which is why I cast the vote that I did. However, we do now, my estimation, have an ability to balance out some free and reduced lunch numbers with respect to Five Oaks and Middle Park. I do support, in general, the amendment number 2 as part of the agenda packet tonight, which moves Rock Creek and Bethany and Oak Hills West south to Five Oaks. The one point I would bring up is the suggestion is to split up El Monica Elementary School. El Monica is a Title I school. I believe that splitting those kids at that time, from 5th grade to 6th grade creates much more difficulty for that population. I think that a non-Title I population, so I would ask that the committee consider that issue. The other thing that I have noticed, and we're going to have to address it, is with these changes that we have suggested, we're simply shifting the free and reduced lunch issue from Five Oaks over to Meadow Park, and that's not tenable to me either. That all leads me to this out-of-the-box idea, which is a consideration, given that Meadow Park is the central school in the district, to consider Meadow Park being a school that concentrates more on housing optional schools and SUMA programs. And then we move the really only elementary school that's in their barns over to Cedar Park, which is short on kids. I think at that point we can have a much more balanced free and reduced lunch situation.
All right. Jason.
So, Mike, I hear what you're saying, but your proposals don't match up in my view. The proposal number 2 is not achieving the balance, it's merely flip-flopping. I mean, you sort of got there in the second part of your statement. But if you continue to follow that, but to move Barnes then over to Cedar Park will then drive Cedar Park's numbers even higher. They're already well above district average. The way you get balance, you've got it for each school, you've got to draw from what I'll call above and below 26. We've got a problem doing that at Five Oaks now without really separating the 2.5 schools that are there. But to consolidate it all into one school, like I said, the proposal number 2 is just, again, I object to it from the point of view of looking at Beaver Acres and Lower Huber Park. As I've said before, you're giving them longer commutes, and they're ending up at a school that's essentially at the same percentage of free and reduced lunch. And I think I said in Lower Huber Park, it'll make its 4th closest school. The reason why I like the configuration as is that it achieves a balance by having some schools above, some schools below. Mike, as far as your idea of kind of going outside of the box of configuring Meadow Park in an entirely different way, I'm supportive of that. It's why I brought up actually closing Meadow Park. But what I would submit to you is that the thing to do is not to send it over to Cedar. The thing to do is to send it to Timberland.
Okay, Abhijit.
So questions? I guess I'm trying to clarify what the amendment 2 was. So the way I'm reading this is, and I think Mike recommended some change to that. So what is shown in the picture, that's the amendment 2, and was Mike suggesting Barnes move to Cedar Park? Is that?
Mike. So the question to you was showing the, what's Five Oaks Middle School 2 on page 5 of the memorandum. It's that plus moving Barnes, Olive Barnes, to Cedar Park. Is that what you were suggesting?
I wasn't making a detailed suggestion or a proposal at that point. So I do agree with Jason that perhaps where Barnes goes is a topic that needs to be delved deeper into. I just wanted to put the concept out there of considering Meadow Park a hub for option schools and SUMA programs, and being the center of the district. That then gives us the leeway to bring some schools, Bethany, Oak Hills West, and Rock Creek down to Five Oaks, and better distributing the free and reduced lunch numbers. So I don't know if that answers your question. Again, I wasn't making a detailed proposal.
No, that's fine. And the second question was, so on page 5, the Meadow Park number says net resident students, so that's not accounting for SUMA kids in the existing boundary. Is that right?
That is correct. We're only looking at resident students.
Yeah, and I agree with Jason, you said, so amendment 2 as is looks good without moving the Barnes, some Barnes remains intact.
All right, Charisse.
Quick point of clarification, are you able to tell us of what we currently have slated for Meadow Park, for Five Oaks, maybe even Mountain View and Cedar Park, which of these elementary schools are Title I schools currently?
Yeah, we can tell you which ones those are. Give us a minute.
McKinley is a Title I school, Belmonica is a Title I school, Beaver Acres is a Title I school, Barnes is a Title I school, Below Huber is a Title I school, and then for additional information, William Walker is a Title I school, Raleigh Hills. Do you want me to go south of Farmington, or you want to just mark them all?
Yeah, that would be great.
Chehalem, Title I, Fir Grove, Title I, Bose, Title I, Greenway, and Hazeldale, and Kinnaman, and that should be 14.
Okay, so just for a point of clarification, for all of us to have it, in order to be qualified as a Title I school, what is that parameter for free and reduced lunch? Is it a percentage, or is it an economic indicator for that area? Can we use that as a parameter when we're moving these schools, that it's going to move that number of equity for us.
My understanding is a Title I school has a 40% or above free and reduced student population, and that changes from year to year, and some schools are higher than others. Although Hugh Park is higher than most, and some of those schools are kind of on the bubble as well. If I've mischaracterized anything, I defer to Ken.
So Ken has given us the thumbs up that it is 40%, and Robert is correct that it can change from year to year.
Okay, and there's nothing above 26 that qualifies?
There are no Title I schools north of 26.
Okay, so this entire pretty much center swath is Title I.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so Monica pulled out the poverty heat map that you had been provided a few meetings ago, and traditionally that has been the location of the district's poverty is in the center east and central part of the district, or center west, sorry. Okay, John.
I just had a point of clarification that I'm trying to understand. By the way, I think these amendment and additional insight you provided is really, really helpful, so I appreciate it. But I did have one question. When we're doing the swap from Amendment 2, for example, it says current with changes, and then the change, so 5 Oaks goes from 58 to 34 to negative 24 is the change. Is current for today, or is current against the work map that we're reviewing?
For today.
Okay, because I do think, I was just trying to do some mental math, and I was thinking these numbers would be off from the work map and the actual changes that we're creating from what we just voted on. Right?
Right, so when we're looking at these numbers, it was solely from what is at 5 Oaks and Middle Park today and how it would change.
Got it. And I guess I just call it out because I think we're saying, I agree that it looks like we're flip-flopping the issue between 5 Oaks and Meadow Park. But I think if we looked at the work map numbers versus the changes, I don't think it would be quite the same flip-flop.
That may be possible, yes. Okay, Matt.
The number 2, I like the flip-flop is there, and I agree with John that it probably may not be as much of a flip-flop as it looks, but in looking at the demographics, I think there's a huge benefit in this move, just in terms of looking at the demos. So.
Okay. Monica.
I think I might say the same thing. It makes me sad, the flip-flop, but then at the same time, I think we're resolving 2 key issues for me, is the huge divide between the current map for Meadow Park, as well as the 2 dual language / 2-way immersion schools, Little Hoover and Barnes feeding into Meadow Park. Both of those make me very happy.
Okay. Anybody else? Mike.
Yeah, I think certainly moving the northern schools makes sense in terms of proximity and transportation. I mean, the Meadow, as currently drawn, is sort of gerrymandered, if you will. The only last piece that I would just reiterate is the amendment as proposed has Monica, the Title I school, being split. And I just don't want that to get lost in the conversation so that committee members can consider that as they vote tonight. I do think splitting up Title I schools is much more difficult for those kids in that population than it is for other schools. So in this particular case, the amendment that I would propose is that we simply have all of Monica stay in 5 Oaks.
So I would just want to be sure, I'm going to call on Michelle next, but in response to your point, Mike, also to note that the high school boundary line runs through the middle of El Monica, and that I'll call it the bottom third of El Monica goes to Aloha, and the northern 2/3 goes to Westview. So if Mike, if we followed through with that minor amendment, that would be a largely Five Oaks. Five Oaks would be a largely Westview school with a little bit of Aloha students at Five Oaks as just part of that calculus. Michelle.
That was going to be exactly my point, and I guess the decision for us would be, is it more detrimental for kids to be separated in the transition from elementary to middle or middle to high?
Okay. Divya.
There is another amendment offered in the same packet about Aloha Huber, Amendment 4, Mountain View, Amendment number 2. Should we look at these two together? Because I think what we do with Aloha Huber is important before we decide the Five Oaks opinion.
So Divya's suggestion is on page 7, where whether or not Aloha Huger Park should be moved to Mountain View as a part of a broader discussion. Now, I would suggest not, just because with the Five Oaks, it still has Beaver Acres attending Five Oaks and not going to Meadow. So Five Oaks, if we just looked at Mountain View 2, we would have a very overcapacity Five Oaks, so we haven't considered that. And that's why I would suggest that Aloha Huber is either a standalone to Mountain View, or we talk about it as part of the Five Oaks number 2 in the staff memo. Michelle, do you have a? Okay.
I guess I would propose, can we vote on this amendment to just Five Oaks, and then talk about Aloha Huber in the context of Mountain View, Meadow Park, and maybe even Highland? Because I don't know that Five Oaks is going to get any better than this.
Okay. So I'm happy to do that. I will call the question as not Meadow Park as is, but I'm sorry. It is not Meadow Park as is in the February or the March 12th map. It is Meadow Park as illustrated in the staff memorandum, where it shows Barnes, Aloha Huber, Beaver Acres, and a portion of El Monica going to Meadow Park, which would in turn mean for Five Oaks that all of Rock Creek, all of Bethany, Oak Hills West, all of McKinley, no, not all of McKinley, 95% of McKinley, a portion of Beaver Acres, and the northern 2/3 of El Monica would feed Five Oaks. So as it's illustrated again on page 5 of the staff memorandum, labeled as Five Oaks Middle School number 2. Is that clear?
Dave, are you asking only about the Five Oaks portion, or are we looking at these together? Because the Five Oaks portion itself is, okay, But if you want to look at these together, then that's not okay for me. So you're talking 5 Oaks
Okay,
only?
so that's a fair point. We were talking about Aloha Huber, and I believe Michelle was the one who was saying, possibilities abound. So, let me rephrase it. We're looking at 5 Oaks only, okay? 5 Oaks only. And it is the Rock Creek, all of Rock Creek, all of Bethany, Oak Hills West, Monica, I'll call it North, most of McKinley, I'd say, again, 95%, and a portion of Beaver Acres. Those portions that feed Westview High School.
That's Monica, not Beaver Acres, right? That corner?
That little corner that pops up is Beaver Acres. Oh, it is El Monica, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, okay, that's right. All right, rephrase. For south of 26, it is all of McKinley that feeds Westview, all of El Monica that feeds Westview. So 5 Oaks would be a Westview feeding middle school only. Okay. Got it? All right, so again, starting on this end, Mike.
I have to vote no, only because of the Monica split there.
Matt.
Yes.
Charisse.
Yes, and I would like to talk about the Monica split after.
Michelle.
Yes.
Divya.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes, I'm open to talking the El Monica split.
Yasmin.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes, and I echo Monica.
John.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes.
Rutika.
Yes.
Jason.
No.
Christy.
Yes.
Marnie.
Yes.
Okay, let me see what Abdul says here. So he says, yes, I agree with Monica's suggestion on Rock Creek, Bethany, Oak Hills West to 5 Oaks for the reduced distance, transportation cost, and preserve dual language feeder option for Meadow Park. So I'm going to put the dual down as a yes. The ayes have it on that one. Okay. So now, with respect to let's take this as I think the question we should discuss next is Mountain View in its entirety, because that would bring in the question about on page 6 and pages 6 and 7 of the staff memorandum would talk about whether or not, map amendment was proposed for Mountain View in the March map is status quo for Mountain View. However, Mountain View number 1 in the memorandum has all of Cooper Mountain going to Mountain View and the Chehalem West going to Highland Park. The other Mountain View proposal is maintaining the status quo, but having Aloha Huber Park move to Mountain View. Okay, so I I make this suggestion to talk about Mountain View because it is part of that linchpin discussion about Aloha Huber Park in terms of which way should it go. All right. So I will start with John. I don't see anybody on stage left, so we'll start with John.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So I'll start just briefly on page 6 on Mountain View Middle School number 1, where we're flipping Cooper Mountain over at Chehalem. As I listened to the testimony that got us interested or curious about this change, I was pretty interested in this change, and I'm appreciative of the data. And as I look at it, I do see a change, but I don't see a significant change, one that would warrant me to want to induce that significant amount of change to two communities to actually switch their schools for what looks like a nominal change. So to me, I'm just saying I do not support that. For the second one, Aloha Huber Park to Mountain View, I do think is interesting. It's not big from a change of free and reduced lunch, but I do think that could make some sense considering all the other efforts that we have to do to fix that area to right size 5 Oaks.
Okay. Sean. I'm sorry, Michelle. I've called you 2 different names already tonight. Sorry.
There's a couple things I'd like to see for Mountain View. It is a fairly poor school, and I think it needs Cooper Mountain to raise or to decrease the free and reduced lunch numbers. It's also proximity-wise, it makes sense. But I would also propose that the tail of Hazeldale feed into Mountain View. So now we're getting rid of 2 elementary school splits. We can get rid of the Hazeldale and the Cooper Mountain and improve the free and reduced lunch numbers for Mountain View.
All right, Jason. And then Monica.
In terms of the Cooper Mountain thing, I tend to agree with John that it's not enough to justify the disruption in my view. Having looked at these numbers several years ago, the freedom of numbers at a school will fluctuate on their own 5 and 6% all the time. So it's on the threshold of being, if we did both of those, being there. I just don't think it's quite enough. I do very much like the idea of adding the tail, as we call it. It's something that will not impact the numbers now because there's no houses there, but hearing about the number of homes there, it seems like, there's just no reason to have those high-value homes go into a school that's below the district average. Let's put it in a Mountain View that needs more balancing out.
All right, Monica, and then Yasmin.
I was just wondering, I don't remember the call for Cougar Mountain. Was that specifically for equity, or was there another?
That was an equity, yes. Okay, Yasmin, and then Charisse.
I'm also a little confused about the Cooper Mountain change because we've heard the public testimony, but reading the comments, I think I've read a lot of people asking for keeping the status quo and not moving this part of the school. And I also need a clarification regarding the number 4, that change number 4. Can you or anybody clarify to me the situation of the dual language and how this would affect it positively or negatively? So I'm sort of confused and cannot make my mind. And if you can help me understand that, that would be great.
So you're talking about dual language in what would be Aloha Huber moving to Mountain View.
How this change would affect that positively or negatively?
Okay. Let me try and take that right now. I believe I sent an email around to, I think it was, Michelle, did you ask the question, or Monica, you asked the question about Aloha Huber and dual language? The way it works is Aloha Huber does offer dual language as an option within the option of the 6th, 7th, 8th grade that they have at Aloha Huber. However, it is not a complete dual language program like you would find at Meadow Park. Okay. I want to come back to the tail. I want to remind people why we proposed that. I'll come back to that, but Charisse.
Okay, in reference to the tail, we're talking about the grid codes that say 0 and 2, correct? That feed all the way up to Hazeldale, right?
Yes.
It makes absolutely no sense to send them anywhere but Conestoga in regards to community-wise. I live in this part of the district. That is a huge dividing line along Shoals Ferry. It does not stop at Mountainside High School, sending those kids all the way up. It just makes no sense. It doesn't make sense to send them to Hazeldale, they should go to Shoals Heights, but that is obviously a different discussion. My question about all of this is actually if we are truly looking to try and balance out this free and reduced lunch, can we do some bigger things here, and is it worth it? And so really this is just airing it out and getting opinions from all of you. If we take Cooper Mountain and Sexton Mountain, or even Cooper Mountain and Nancy Rouse, and push them to Mountain View, move Chehalem and Highton into Highland Park, and leave room in Conestoga, which is the other highly populated middle school with growth coming, with availability to grow and take that tail from Hazeldale. Does that help us any as we're trying to move things around down there and look at more of a vertical split, knowing that we have all of those schools across that band in the middle that do have that Title I funding? Can we pull things more in a vertical manner and pull some of the areas up that are not those Title I areas? I don't know if it's worth looking at if we want to look at that.
Could you restate the schools?
For me too. Really not sure. So if we were to try and take 2 Title I elementary schools into each middle school, can we do that? Could we take Chehalem, Fir Grove, into Highland Park where they're close enough? No one's going, Sexton Mountain going to Highland Park, they're not crossing Murray, so that's going to be a bus district no matter what. Everything on that west side of Highland Park is getting bused because they're crossing Murray. So can we use that as an opportunity, with walkers? Can we get walkers from Highton to walk to Highland Park? Because that would not add, right? And then if we take Chehalem out of Mountain View, can we then put Aloha Park in, add Cooper Mountain in? Does that balance enough? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, are there options here?
All right, Matt.
I was again just going to point out, I know the free and reduced lunches is important, and this doesn't necessarily move the needle that much, but again, on the diversity and the demographics, I think the suggestions here are pretty good. For the tail, I think I agree with that. I think Fir Grove already goes to Highland Park.
Yes.
Okay. So the Title I's going into Highland would be Chehalem. Well, Fir Grove's already there. So it would just be moving Chehalem in. Okay.
So
all of Highton?
So Charisse, can you use the microphone, please?
Sure, and this is, of course, me talking loud. If anyone has a better idea, please. But if we were trying to take and have each one have 2, max of 3 Title I elementary schools into each middle school, can we do that in the South? Would Highland Park look best as Chehalem, Fir Grove, and then figure out what other elementary schools make sense, either based on walkability or equity and other manners? Are there ways to do it?
Okay. So I wanted to talk about the tail and why we proposed to have the tail go to Highland Park. So yes, it does create a split with Hazeldale right now. We do have a lot of development coming in that area, and we do have property in that area for a future elementary school. Of course, it would require passage of a bond, and we'd have to fund an elementary school as a part of that bond. But we know what's coming in that area, and so we prepared for that. The reason why we proposed the tail in the location that we did is that in all without going on the record as saying this is what we're going to do, but in all likelihood, this would be a feeder or an attendance boundary for that future elementary school. So yes, we recognize that it does create a split right now, but in the future, that split would be remedied. Now, I'll qualify this one more time. I am not saying that's what's going to happen. It will be a public process, but in all likelihood, that's the general boundary that would be created. Okay, Monica.
I definitely am open to, I like the discussion of equaling out, but I feel like we have to walk away tonight with a firm proposal because we have to give the public enough time to respond. That's a huge change for the south side of the district at the next to last meeting. I feel uncomfortable with that.
Okay. Abhijit.
So I'll echo Monica. I like the idea of what Cherries was saying. I was looking at the walking map. It was a little bit confusing. It looks like ATM, most of it is walking to Conestoga. So making that change would again be tricky. And I do remember your explanation of the Hazeldale split. So I think after looking at the Cooper Mountain Trail and changed numbers, not changing really much like John mentioned. Mountain View as is looks good for me.
Okay. All right, so are we done talking about what we would call Mountain View number 1 and Mountain View number 2 at this point? All right. Here's the vote I'm going to call. Based on the conversation that I've heard here this evening, without the, I don't hear a clear consensus on doing anything radically different from what we have here, either in the staff report or on the map. The question I'm going to call is Mountain View as is in the March 12th map. That means Hazeldale without its tail, all of Camden, all of, all of Errol Hassel, Chehalem West, Cooper Mountain North, and there's a little portion of, who is that? Is that little portion of Errol Hassel? Yeah, that little portion of Errol Hassel, that would be feeding into Mountain View. So as it's illustrated in the March 12th map. All right. Yes.
Like 9 kids.
Yeah. It's a little goofy. Okay. All right. Okay, I'll call the question again, starting with Mike.
No.
Matt.
No. No.
Charisse.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Divya.
No.
Monica.
Yes?
Yasmin.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Sean.
No.
Jennifer.
No.
Rutika.
No.
Jason.
No.
Christy.
No.
Marnie.
No.
All right, I don't have an email from Abdul, so we'll wait on that. The noes have it on on the March 12th map. So the next question in terms of Mountain View, I would ask Mountain View with respect to, in the staff report, we have Mountain View number 1, where it's all of Cooper Mountain feeding Mountain View, and then Chehalem West going to Highland Park. This would that would be the existing map, except for Cooper Mountain, all of Cooper Mountain going to Mountain View, and Chehalem West going to Highland Park. Got it? Okay. Any questions before we do the vote? Charisse.
Does any part of the rest of the Cooper Mountain boundary fit in the Mountain View walkability area? Because I know it's a hard line there where clearly they're not walkable to Highland Park, but would any of that change if we were to pull them into Mountain View?
Mr. Beaver?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. One more time.
It's okay. So down here, this is the walkability for the middle school that they're assigned to, correct? So for Highland Park, clearly that's not walkable. Would there be walkability to Mountain View if we were to move the rest of Cooper Park? Would any of these grid codes be walkable?
No.
No. Okay.
Hey, Stephen, before we vote, just so I can focus and I want to make sure I respect everyone's time, I just want to point of order on the time for the meeting when we're planning on wrapping. I just, out of respect for everyone's time, and I just want, we're cooking with gas, and I like that. I just wanted to kind of get a mental plan.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is we'll vote on this question, and then I'll come back to seeing how your stamina is. And I agree, I think we're doing well. So I'm game, but that's just me, I don't get to vote. Okay, so the question is, as illustrated on page 6 of the staff memorandum, it's Mountain View Middle School number 1, all of Cooper Mountain feeding Mountain View, Chehalem West feeding Highland Park. Okay? All right. Starting again with Mike.
No.
Matt.
Yes.
Charisse.
No.
Michelle.
Yes.
Divya.
Small changes to the change, yes.
Monica.
Yes.
Yasmin.
No.
Abhijit.
Yes.
John.
No.
Sean.
Yes.
Jennifer.
No.
Ritika.
Yes.
Jason.
No.
Christy.
Yes.
Marnie.
Yes.
And I have an email from Abdul. Okay, he's asking for the voting question again. Okay, so Abdul, this is what's happening. The vote is, if you look at your staff memorandum, it is Mountain View Middle School number 1 on page 6 of the memorandum. That shows all of Cooper Mountain feeding into Mountain View and Chehalem Elementary West feeding into Highland Park. I'll give you a minute here. All right, while we're waiting for Abdul here, I'm going to call another vote. Well, let me count here. So that's 9, which is a majority for map Mountain View map number 1. So let me ask a different question. To John's point about time and being respectful of everyone's time, also recognizing that next meeting is not guaranteed, I would request that you stick with us until we can get through the boundary. But again, I'm looking to you in terms of your volunteers, so you tell me. So for those of you who are willing to stick around, and again, the majority is the tyranny in this. If we have 9 people willing to stay, the 6 of you will join. So,
I'd like it if we maybe put an end on the, like,
Right.
where are we going to, because this could turn into congressional session.
So for me, this is a every half hour question. So we're at 9 o'clock right now, and we would ask the question again if we needed to at 9:30. So with that, can I have a show of hands in terms of who is willing to stay at least until 9:30? Okay, that's enough. All right, yes. Now, here's what I'm going to suggest is we take a 5-minute break to take a nature call, and for those of you who are watching, we will come right back at 9:05. And what this particular amendment does is it has Olive Farms in Meadow Park plus all of Aloha Huber, all of Beaver Acres, and the Aloha portion of Bella Monica and McKinley feeding into Meadow Park. So, again, that's on page 5 of the memorandum. We have talked about this a bit already. I don't think we need to plow the same ground on this. It was observed that there is basically a switch between Five Oaks and Meadow Park in terms of the free and reduced lunch. There are 3 high schools that are being fed from Meadow Park under this model. The smallest proportion would be Sunset, followed by feeding to Beaverton, and the most would be Aloha. So, with that, are there any other additional questions or comments before we call a question? Charisse.
I don't have an answer to this, but I'm wondering if anyone on the committee sees a way for us to lower this number in any way, shape, or form, anything creative. Does anyone see a way to lower this number?
Barney.
Okay, so referring back to working map C that the transportation department put together, and it kind of touches on Jason's earlier point that in order to do some of the balancing, because all of our Title I schools are below 26, south of 26. I realize we've already done Timberland, so don't shoot me. But, Oak Hills would raise the numbers significantly if they were at Meadow Park. And I'm not saying that's the right, I'm just throwing something out there. Anything else, or you guys have any suggestions, please, but 59%, guys, is not okay.
Monica. And then Yasmin. Did you have a? Oh, okay. So Yasmin.
So I don't have any creative solutions, but
from real close.
Okay, I don't have any creative solutions. That's what I said. So I think Meadow Park has the SUMA program, and this might improve the 59%. And I'm not sure that what I just said is really correct. You might know better than this.
So right now, the map that we started with for the March 12th working map had 132 students feeding to Meadow Park in their SUMA program. And this is kind of the central area, which includes Cedar Park, Five Oaks, and Meadow Park resident students. So it's not like the Wismer or Findlay example where there are resident students. They are drawn from a broader pool. So 132 of those students, if that remained the same, would certainly have some influence. What we would have to calculate.
So at least I think the SUMA kids coming from Bethany Elementary and from Oak Hills, the ones who they
used to go to Meadow Park, they will continue to go to Meadow Park. So, yeah, that was the point.
Yeah, under this map, that 132, that's drawing those students from Oak Hills and Bethany. So yeah, if the feeder pattern for Suma were to remain the same, then it'd probably be equivalent. When we redraw this, based on the way that Five Oaks has been drawn, the Suma numbers may look a little different.
Okay. Mike?
I agree conceptually, it's not acceptable to have 59% here if there are other options in terms of free and reduced lunch. As an alternative to my earlier proposal, thinking outside the box and turning Meadow Park into the option school, we could consider splitting up Terralinda with some of Terralinda going to Timberland instead of coming south from Meadow Park. I don't like splitting up if we don't have to, but to improve the free and reduced lunch numbers, that may be preferable.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Christy, then I'm going to come back to Divya.
Again, thinking out of the box, we discussed previously, or it was earlier in this process, an idea of a high school boundary adjustment for Oak Hills. And because Westview is overcrowded, adjusting the high school boundary so all of Oak Hills feeds Sunset, and then move all of Oak Hills to Meadow Park. That would be one possibility I'd like to recommend.
Okay. Divya, and then Abhijit.
My question is more about the dual language program, which I think is important for the schools that are in Meadow Park boundary right now, Aloha, Huber, Barnes. How difficult is it to offer in Cedar Park? I'm questioning, do we need Meadow Park right now? If they go to Cedar Park.
Well, as we talked about, I believe it was at the last two meetings, closing a middle school would be outside the purview of this committee, so I wouldn't want to continue that conversation at this point. So we'll do Abhijit and then Monica.
Continuing on what Christy said, do you know tentatively when would high school boundary change might happen?
That would be something that we would take to the board. We would have to obviously have an internal conversation about, strategy of when we would do certain amendments. These public processes, as you know, take time, and if you're volunteering for another shift, you would.
So to add on to what Christy said, Westview to Sunset is bound to happen. Right? Westview has about 435 portable capacity, and even with that, they are within 40, 429 today. And Sunset has about 200. So if we know there is a timeline like this, and if what Marnie said, I don't have the free and reduced length change on C. If it does change, then I think that would be the right thing to do. But again, I don't know how much difference is that. And also it will not lock us in. My guess is when you do the high school boundary change, if you convert Oak Hills into full Sunset feeder, you are going to recommend a middle school boundary adjustment at that time and make it really anyways.
Correct.
So the question is, should that go to Five Oaks at that time, or should that be Meadow Park? That's really what we decide here will have implications down there.
Right. Okay, Monica.
It's not my favorite idea, but how would, if we're saying that the Bethany, Rock Creek, Suma would feed into Meadow Park, that would help. Could Rachel Carson go to Meadow Park and then we put Raleigh Park back into Cedar Park?
So this conversation was had when we were looking at putting Rachel Carson at Whitford and having multiple options apparently is a master scheduling, if not nightmare, and possibility. Okay, so challenge. So that would not be something that we would recommend doing. You know, putting an option in the school is fine, but putting in multiple is less than ideal. Jason.
So answering the call to out-of-the-box ideas, as we talk about other maps, I just hate the idea of Beaver Acres and Lower Huber Park feeding into Meadow Park, especially it's longer commutes for them and to be in essentially the same situation. I will note, having looked at this option, that there is projected to be space for Beaver Acres in Five Oaks if we look at the 2025 numbers. So the out-of-the-box option would be to keep it in Five Oaks and recommend the changes in that particular configuration be postponed for a few years, and we find room for Lower Huber Park and Mountain View, which would require us to undo some of the things we just reached consensus on, at which point we are left with only Meadow Park, only barns at Meadow Park, and we go down the avenue of Mike's idea of that becoming an attraction for option schools. Divya.
In the spirit of creative ideas, don't shoot me, please. So along the lines of what Christy said, all of Oak Hill's going to Meadow Park with the boundary adjustment for high school. Can Jacob Wismer Sunset portion of it go to Timberland in exchange?
Well, if you want to revisit that subject.
I don't. Don't want to add another 30 minutes, but.
Yeah, say that again.
So all of Oak Hills will become Sunset, go to Meadow Park. Sunset portion of Jacob Wismer goes to Timberland.
No, Jacob Wismer, that portion is much bigger than the small part of Oak Hills.
Okay, I'm just creative ideas.
Okay, so taking a look at the time, so you have 9 minutes left here. I see, creativity, it's all good, but I also want to observe that we have put ourselves in a bit of a box with respect to decisions that you've reached a consensus on Five Oaks and on Mountain View. That means we don't have a whole lot of anything else to do with Beaver Acres, Lower Huber, and that portion of El Monica. So unless you're willing to go back and revisit the items that you've reached consensus on for Five Oaks and Mountain View, you have already made a recommendation, I would suggest. Charisse.
I mean, frankly, that's what I was just going to say, which was the main reason I wanted to start from the south and go up, because I would even take that further, that if we were going to revisit those, we'd have to revisit Stoller again. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. Outside, I don't think your idea was a terrible idea. Yes, Jacob Wismer has more students than that other side of Oak Hills. However, Stoller's overcrowded. Wouldn't be the worst thing.
Take away the kids.
Okay. Michelle and then John.
What about Lower Huber to Highland? Now that we have Chehalem going to Highland, right? It does create a triple high school feed, but we're already talking about that we're already doing that.
That's something we'd have to do an analysis on. I would note, just from a transportation point of view, it doesn't cross railroad. But it is a long drive. But that's speculation on my part. We'd have to do proper analysis.
I think it's closer than 5 bucks.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that. John and then Abijah.
So one idea to stay in the box that we've drawn for ourselves would be to split the recommendation, and I'd be interested in the data that we could do, is that we don't move all of those schools, but we just move a couple or 1, 2 of those schools, because we did create a significant reduction in Five Oaks for reduced lunch, so maybe we could balance some of that back by just moving 1 or 2 schools to Meadow Park, and not all of the schools. And I would be interested just to see some analysis on school by school making the shift, not moving a whole lot.
Okay. Abijah?
I was thinking if we, I mean, Michelle's idea is good. I was just doing the numbers and I couldn't make my head close. But in interest of time, for Meadow Park, if we were to choose what Christy suggested, what is the, I mean, sorry, I know you said it's a public process for high school boundary change, but what I'm sensitive to is we don't want to make a change now and the high school boundary that we're banking on takes 3 years. If it is going to happen next year, then I think that's an option, worthy option to consider and put to vote and see.
It presumes that it would even happen. That's part of it, is we could, for argument's sake, we could say, yeah, we can commit to doing the high school process next year, but there's no guarantee in terms of any outcome. That's why I say that. We'll do Jason and then Christy.
Just a suggestion, not to wave the white flag yet, but I think, as you said, we've got ourselves into a box that we're not happy with. I believe we have to go back and revisit some things. I actually don't believe we have to go back and revisit solar. But at this point, mindful of the time, I would almost call for a vote for the entire map as we have morphed it. I expect it to fail, in which case this carries forward the next time, and we talk about additional meetings. But I think that's where we're at.
So, Christy.
I think it was Michelle that suggested moving Aloha Huber Park to Highland Park, and I think the numbers will probably work with that based on the Mountain View MS1 changes. I think that would be, I would like to see a map with that change implemented.
Okay. And Monica?
I might be tired, we might have already voted on this, and it's a small adjustment, but if we're talking about moving poverty out of Meadow Park, and like John said, Five Oaks looks a little bit better, we could put all of Monica back into Five Oaks. Is that off base with what you were saying, John?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, we have just a couple of minutes left before we got to ask a question about another 30 minutes. What I'd like to do is remind everybody we have a final meeting on April 2nd. We have a process wherein we need to get to our board where they do 2 readings of a decision where it's, are the board objectives being met? We also have the superintendent's decision that needs to happen, which also includes, we've committed to doing a listening session, much like we did with the high school boundary, which is a public process, where we will have testimony come and do that. There is, and the end of it is allowing for a year of transition planning for families and schools. So if we were to add any meetings, we have a very, very small window to do that, where it is at best one additional meeting. And you would have to request that meeting. We're not going to impose any more additional meetings on you. But please keep that in mind as you are thinking about how to proceed here. So I will call on Marnie and then Charisse.
Okay. Okay, in all honesty, I'm being Fred. And because of the type of person that I am, I feel like I need to see some things visually that I'm not seeing right now in our current maps. And since all the concerts and activities got canceled next week, I'm wondering if you guys have some time next week we could squeeze a meeting in before spring break.
Charisse.
I'm fine with the meeting. I'm concerned that while we've been sitting here, Tiger Tualatin closed their schools, and I believe Lake Oswego did too. So if that happens in response to COVID-19, are these even possible? And what does that do to our timeline?
So I'm looking at leadership in the back of the room, and I'm not sure what we've decided yet. And okay, there's been no discussions on that yet. Oh, decisions. Lots of discussions, no decisions. Sorry. So for those of you who are watching at home, there are no decisions on whether schools are closed or not. Let's be clear. If, in fact, we would have to have a conversation as our leadership would have to have, is answering that specific question. I cannot answer that. I can give you my opinion, but I cannot give you an answer to that. John.
Oops, I'm sorry. So I guess my question becomes, do we need to, as a group, come up with two different options of if this happens, we have a plan, and if it does not, then we move forward in a certain way, maybe before spring break meeting,
Okay.
so that we can do that tonight before we leave.
Well, if Marty is a visual learner, which many of us are, we are not going to have enough time to produce maps tomorrow to publish and get out there with any meaningful time to review and understand. So I appreciate the idea of wanting to squeeze in one before spring break, but just thinking of our own workload and ability to perform, I wouldn't want to set us up for failure in that regard. John.
Thanks, Stephen. I would tend to agree that I think we're running out of steam a bit in terms of making really wise decisions. And I also think we have a lot of changes that we need to see before we can finalize where we're at. I know clearly we're going to have a problem with that area right there right now, but we need to probably see visually what the changes are and come back with some clear minds on how to finalize this, because there are people who are really concerned about this. I don't want to rush it. And it was my sense from listening to Superintendent Grotting that he would support us having more time if we needed it so that we get this right. I can't speak for him, but that was my sense, what I got from what he had said. So I would lean toward, let's push to the next scheduled tentative meeting on April 2nd with the hope that we can get the materials we need, if we may have to meet virtually or whatever other things may come to, but that we hope for that ability and we bring it with all of the data that you can bring at that time.
Okay. We'll go with Divya and then Monica.
My question is more process related. We've made a lot of changes. Some of it we may like, may not like. So I'm just curious what happens after April 2nd.
I'll get to that. Monica.
Okay, I know that we've discussed this as a district for just school-wide, but is virtual meetings an option?
You are not making a decision, you are making a recommendation. So in terms of doing a virtual meeting, that is something we can do. I'd want to review with council on that, but there is not an open meetings law that's applicable to this group, again, because you're making a recommendation. It is a question of public access and seeing what's being done, who's doing what. We would have to take some pretty copious notes as we went along in order to assure that people knew what was going on or what had gone on at that. But that is something we can certainly come back on.
Because I feel like that takes a lot of pressure off of trying to rush a decision. Even if everything closes down, we could have the potential of closing it, even though it takes away the transparency to the public, and that's really unfortunate. There's a lot of stuff going on that's unfortunate right now.
Agreed. And as I said earlier, we're all breaking new ground here on doing this, so we can certainly maintain. Abhijit, I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to talk process for a second.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we can sneak in a vote on Cedar Park and Whitford. I think we were very close on Whitford. And the area we're talking about is going to impact Five Oaks, Meadow Park, and if we go Michelle's option, maybe Highland Park. But the rest of the three, if we can agree on preliminary, it might not be too terrible. It's very good.
So I will remind everybody that you did make some progress on Whitford and Conestoga at last, I think it was 2 meetings ago. And so it's basically Cedar Park and Meadow Park right now that you're struggling on. And I would prefer not to do Cedar Park right now, just again because of the time, and John's already said his brain is fried. So let me talk process here for just a moment. First off, let me get a show of hands. Are you willing to meet again in that next meeting? Well, let me describe the process. Our next scheduled meeting is April 2nd. And assuming that we can still have the meeting without any other disruptions, it would be April 2nd. The next date for the final meeting, and it would have to be the final meeting, is April 16th. That's a Thursday, 2 weeks after the 2nd.
I'd just like to point out that's my birthday.
And, okay, so you all, per school district tradition, you bring the cake. Actually, it's donuts, but anyway, we'll take cake. The process is, we are going to take what we heard here tonight. Robert is on about page 11 of notes. We're going to bring back analysis of the recommendations that you've made so you can see what it means. We will look at Meadow Park, Cedar Park, and we'll look at changes of where could Aloha Huber land, specifically is it Highland Park, and what would that mean? Okay. On the 2nd, I would like, again, for us to get to that final preliminary conclusion. The last meeting will be largely a public meeting where we will be considering public testimony, at which time, after that public testimony is finished, would be your final deliberations based on what you heard from the public, based on what you see in the materials, and you will come to a final vote on the map. Okay? We will talk about legacy at the next meeting, and I'd like to get to a preliminary recommendation on that as well, so when we do have the public meeting, everything's open for conversation. The public testimony part would be more than the 20 minutes-ish that we've been doing. It'd be a minimum of an hour, but we need to see how far we get along at the meeting on the 2nd if we've got to reserve any final deliberation time for the committee. Jason.
I'll just note that for us to, certainly for myself, to get past our impasse, we're going to need more variations and ideas than what we discussed here. I mean, as you noted, we're basically boxed in. There's not much else to do, and moving the Lower Huber Park is certainly fine to consider, but now we're left with 2 elementary schools at Meadow. So we're going to have to do a bunch of other stuff. So I've got all sorts of ideas, but unless we need to decide on what we can introduce and when to make it, I think, to get us to a productive place, other than just come in and be staring right at the wall we don't want to run into.
Well, the point is you're running into the wall. You're there. And we're not going to, I cannot in good measure suggest that we reopen and start looking at more ideas. We have ideas that you've seen. We'll bring you some more. And if it means going back and adjusting some of the decisions that you made, okay. But in terms of, more wholesale changes, you don't have the time to do that. You're going to have to make a decision as perhaps imperfect as you may feel. I think, John, you said at the last meeting, if it was a nice, neat solution, we would have found it already. We have a lot of hard rows to hoe, and you started that tonight. You've done a good job. Okay. I will send an email around to you all, because I'm sure you'll agree to anything at this point, but I will send an email to you all confirming your availability for April 16th for the last meeting. Okay. All right. So with that, I apologize. We're 10 minutes over at 9:30. We are adjourned. Stay safe. Stay